panel's on now, and this one I have been waiting all day for, and I'm going to see if I can get in, because this is a Q&A. It's Stump the Panel time. I'm going to see if I'm going to get on. Have we got the QR code? And see if I can stump the panel, because the subject is feature toggles, and I wanted to tell a quick feature toggle story of how feature toggles were once used as a weapon at the REA group, where I arrived into a standing war between sales and technology. Sales who had shit on engineers for 2 years with no feature development while they migrated, with Thoughtworks' help, an incredibly complex monolith to a new Java framework. And I was, as the new boy CIO, was quietly paraded in front of the magnificent board of features. We'll show those bastards. We've done all these features and we've toggled them off, just waiting, and then they can just eat that lot as fast as they can. And it was just like a moment. I'm not sure that's how feature toggles were supposed to be used as revenge. And we worked on that accordingly, that maybe we wouldn't make 55 product features in advance of the being able to roll out.
They're going to tell you all.
So yeah, you'll have to answer that question. Can feature toggles be used as a weapon? But on this panel, Luke McCarthy got he and him as his pronouns. That's pretty cool. Senior software developer. A good person to have around if your computer breaks. If anyone's got a phone, between these three of them, if you've got issues, they will be able to fix it for sure. He famously broke his family computer and was forced to fix it before Mum got home. So he's since added a computer science degree to that pressure and has delivered so many software projects he's probably forgotten half of them.
And we have Mira Kim. Mira goes by she or her. Mira has a special interest in mobile technologies and security. And she has an interest in building things right, and you can see her actually advocating for all the right engineering practices. And we have Gabriel Sadaka. Gabriel goes by he or him, and I guess between them they have the special knack of knowing how to break things. So that's how Gabriel started in the technology field, but I guess as he grew up, he stopped breaking things and more recently starting to build things. And over to you folks. And like we said, it's a panel discussion. They are here to answer your questions, so feel free to ask anything about feature toggles. Please add your questions to the slider.
We've lost the clicker. Thank you. All right. So this is an interactive session. This is going to be about your questions, so hopefully, yes, take out your phones if you haven't already done so and grab that QR code. If you've already done it today, you can actually click on the talk title and find all the talks. We're the one at the bottom because we're the last of the day. So if you don't ask us questions, then you will get all my boring pre-canned questions, so I'd much rather answer yours than the ones I've already written. So who here has, actually I'll go back so that people can do that slide. Who here has used or knows what feature toggles are? And who's used them actually in production? Nearly the same. Okay, but there's quite a few people that haven't used them or didn't put their hand up for knowing what they are. So hopefully you've got that slide up there now. So what are feature toggles? They're a condition in our code that allow us to change the functionality at runtime. There are different types of feature toggles. We have release toggles. These are the things that we put a feature toggle around, we deploy it into production, and at that point, once it's in production and we're ready to turn it on, we can turn it on and actually release the code. This allows us to divorce release and deployment. We have experimental toggles. This might be used when you have a feature that you're not quite sure if it's going to work. Maybe you're going to do A/B testing to see how users react to it, or you're unsure of the performance hit you might take. So you put this around an experimental toggle, and then you can turn it on and off if things start to go wrong, or you can start to test it. We also have ops toggles. Have you ever been to a website and you've seen the website's down for maintenance? Then this is probably a good use of ops toggles that might be being used. And finally, we have permission toggles. Permission toggles allow us to do things like paywalls and other features like that, where maybe we've got some users with extra privileges, and we can use that type of toggle to turn features on and off, like admins and payrolls, that type of stuff. So with that, hopefully we have some audience questions. We do? Great. Mira, would you like to read out a question?
So I think the top question about what is a feature toggle is already answered. So I think we can skip that one. Next question is when committing IAC. What is IAC? Does anyone know? With the software code base in the same repo, can feature toggles help? Infrastructure as code.
Ooh, I'm not an infrastructure person. This is not my strong point.
Yeah.
So the question, when committing infrastructure as code with the software code base in the same repository, can feature toggles help, or should we commit them in separate repositories? I've seen all of that in one repository. I've seen the source code of the application, the source code of the infrastructure, the database migrations, the feature toggles all living in one repository, all quite happy together. I'm not sure if there's a particular reason why putting them all together in one would cause friction or provide a reason to separate them. I think an interesting application with infrastructure as code with feature toggles is actually the ability to define your feature toggles in the infrastructure as code. So if you're using a software as a service to manage your feature toggles, you can actually define them in, say, Terraform, and then you can commit that with your code, which then leverages that feature toggle and then goes all the way out to production in one hit. So actually, I think there's reasons to keep them all together if you're taking that approach. I can't think of a reason why having them all together would be a problem, though.
I have a sort of a follow-up question, because I'm a little bit ignorant around this area, I guess. How would you actually implement them? Because my understanding of infrastructure as code is it's usually a YAML file or some sort of file like that gets pushed in, and something reads it and interprets it and spins up a whole bunch of stuff. So how do you do a feature toggle with YAML?
Yeah, sure. So what I was describing was, say, if you're using YAML for your infrastructure as code, if you're using Terraform's own language as well, you would define like the name of the toggle as part of the code that goes out. So you would say, here are all of the toggles that are available in the application, and then within the actual code base, you reference that name, and then from there, the application would talk to whichever service knows about the values of those toggles and whether they're on or off, and then from there, kind of connects together.
Okay. Let's maybe move on to the next one.
Cool. So we've got, who should control the toggle? Dev, product, maybe sales?
I have strong opinions on this.
Let's hear them.
I think people need to have enough context to be able to control them. If you have people, I've had situations recently where sales have gone and turned things on, and there was more than one toggle needed for a feature, and everything broke and blew up. And this was in a different time zone to what we all worked. And they weren't the ones that were waking up to be, oh, the system's broken, please come and fix it. There was no warning given to the developers or the team. It was just, oh, we want this feature, we're going to turn it on, and everything broke. So yes, you could give it to sales with the caveat that they have, and not to pick on sales, but anyone that's not a developer or someone in the team that actually has full context, I would be reluctant to. But if they have the context, I think it's probably okay. But my preference would be for the DevOps. You write it, you run it. It breaks, you wake. So those are the people that should be turning the things on and off, because they're the ones that have the context and feel the pain.
I would disagree with that. I think Luke covered briefly, I think it's still on the slide, about different types of toggles. And especially with release toggles, I believe the main purpose is for us to be able to release continuously and separate the release from the deployment of the software. So in that case, what it comes down to is the definition and the clarity. So we shouldn't just have jumble of all of the toggles that have different meanings in all place. I believe that we should have, especially for release toggles, should be nicely structured and organized, and the full control should be given over to marketing or sales or product managers or whoever to just turn on when they're ready to release it. As long as we are able to maintain that and make sure we clean up afterwards and not just have them there forever, that's sort of my opinion.
Yeah, I do agree with you. It's just, I think sometimes that context is missing, and that's more my pain point. That, you know, when people don't have that context, they flip random things on, and look, you know, one of the anti-patterns of feature toggles is not naming them well, and naming's hard, as we know, as developers, and if you don't have really good descriptive names or even some descriptive text with the toggle that tells you what it does, then you can mess things up pretty easily. So I think it's more, for me, it's around the context than the role. If they have the full context, then I'd be okay with it.
So actually, there's a good follow-up question. Do you have any feature toggling horror stories to share?
Yeah, lots. I've written a whole talk on this, feature toggle anti-patterns, and I could talk at length about all the mistakes, but I can talk about some of the mistakes I've made personally. When I first started at Thoughtworks, we were working on a mobile app, and I'd never used feature toggles before. And we were just about to release the thing, and the tech lead said to the team, "Okay, team, from now on, we're going to feature toggle all our features so that we're always in a releasable state." We were doing trunk-based development and TDD and all the good things that we like to do at Thoughtworks. And got this feature. I'm like, "Oh, this is a really easy feature. There won't be any bugs in this. I'll be finished before we're ready to release." A couple of days later, the tech lead comes to the team and says, "Great, we're about to release. Does anybody have a reason that we shouldn't release?" And I was like, "I do. I've not finished that feature yet. It's got a toggle around it, right?" "No." "Why not?" "I thought it'd be finished." So there's a pretty awful story. Another one recently was a client, again, turned a toggle on that they didn't understand and everything broke. So many. I could go on at length, but maybe I'll give someone else a turn.
Yeah, I think I worked at a company where we were building white label software, and so for the software that we're building, each of the customers that we built it for would have a different set of features that they had enabled for them based on their needs, and then moving forward for their own customers, different organizations that they would sell that software to would have different features enabled as well. And so when we would get a bug report, you had to understand our immediate customer, what they had set up, and then their own customers, what they had set up, and then from there together you create the total context of the features that are enabled and the exact combination, and then you can find that exact code path that led to that particular situation. I think, it created a lot of complexity when trying to diagnose issues, and even if it looked like a similar issue, just that one tiny toggle somewhere can change the behavior quite drastically, and created quite a bit of a nightmare sometimes when you're trying to respond to an incident and you're like, "Oh, okay, what do they have on, what do they have off, and who is this customer, and what are they providing to their own customers?"
Do you have any horror stories, Mira?
My one is pretty short. The first work I've done at the client, pretty much in the first couple of weeks I joined, the first work that we released was removing a feature toggle that wasn't used anymore. And everyone told us, "Yeah, it's not used, it's fine." We deleted it. First incident. So.
Yeah. That sounds like lots of fun. You've now removed a feature toggle so you can't turn it back on, and
yeah. We had to revert that change.
Yeah, sounds very stressful.
The next question, I guess maybe related to this, is when should we not use feature toggles? Is there any situation we shouldn't use them?
Yeah, I think there are situations where the code that you're writing doesn't have a direct impact to the customer. So For an example, like if you've got an API, adding a new endpoint to it, if it's not exposed via any of the interfaces that you have available to your customers, there's no way of that code path actually being naturally triggered in production, then adding a feature toggle around the implementation for that endpoint might not be necessary to begin with. You can add it later on if you find that you need it, but yeah, if there's no natural code path that will reach it, I think that there are situations where it's safe to not add it, and yeah, just the less conditions that you have in the code, the less feature toggles you have to worry about, the easier it is to maintain. So I think at least in that situation, it makes sense to try and avoid using them if you don't need to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also add there are probably certain types of projects that you might want to think really hard before using them. Things that require mathematical proofs before they go out, things like medical equipment, flight systems. You probably don't want to be toggling stuff on and on a plane while it's mid-air. You know, the aviation authority might have something to talk to you about that. Again, things like if you know that the code can't be reached from the client, but probably for the vast majority of stuff that most people work on, it's probably a good idea. They really provide a big safety net. Like, it's really nice when you deploy something and then you go, oh, okay, we're going to release this now, and you turn it on, and then everything goes wrong. Turning it off again, and then everything goes back to normal. It's just so powerful. Or even the business comes to you and says, oh, we don't want to release that feature this week. We've decided we want to do it in a month's time, or whatever the time frame is. Those are really nice things to have that will reduce the stress in your life.
Cool. Can move on to the next question. We've got, how many feature toggles is too many feature toggles?
What was that one, sorry?
How many feature toggles is too many feature toggles? I don't know if there's a magic number to this one.
Yeah,
3.
I wouldn't pick a magic number on it either.
Yeah.
What's the most you've seen?
Too many.
Too many to count, and I think that's probably the problem, right? Like, if there's too many that you can't even count them, then you probably have too many. I think for me, I would say keep just enough that you can keep them in your head and remember what they are. If you get to a point where you can't remember all of the toggles that you have, you probably are at a point where you've got too much work in flight. I think that is mostly for release toggles and experimental toggles. So when it comes to ops toggles and permissioning toggles, they tend to be more long-lived, and it's okay to have more of them. But particularly release toggles, in the trunk-based development situation, the more you have, it indicates that you've got more work in flight that's not complete. Because if it's complete, the toggle shouldn't be there anymore. So try and limit the amount of work that you have in progress at any given point in time, and that should follow that you would have less feature toggles that are currently in your code base that are active. I
agree. If one team member can't keep the toggles in their head, you've probably got too many. That doesn't mean you shouldn't document them. You should still document them so you know what's going on. Like, don't rely on, someone wins lottery and says, I'm out of here, and then the person that remembers all the feature toggles gone out of your team. Like, that's pain waiting to happen. But yeah, try to have as few as possible. Again, like you said, ops toggles and permission toggles, they're harder to keep a lid on because they are long-lived by nature. Experimental toggles and release toggles, keep them as small as possible. What I like to do keep them as small as possible is to make removing the toggle as part of the definition of done, which is a little controversial because you can't always do it. For example, if you're doing it with a mobile app, that toggle will live for as long as people use that version that toggle first went in. So you have to be really, then you have to sort of keep another card around or something, some way of tracking to say, this is when the toggle first went into the code, so from this version, and then you can know, well, this is when the toggle got deleted in the code. So once that version is no longer around, the one where it got deleted, that's when you can finally go into your system and delete the toggle. But try and keep them as few as possible. Let's do the, have you thought of environmentally friendly feature toggles, i.e. for relaxed SLAs mentioned by Luke this morning? The other Luke, that is, of course.
A config file?
Well, no, I think this sort of leads back to the ops toggles, or experimental toggles, sorry. So if you want to relax your SLAs, one example on Martin Fowler's blog about feature toggles was that you release something into production or there's a big event happening, like the Super Bowl in America or AFL Grand Final, something like that, and you're getting a lot of traffic. You could turn off a feature with a feature toggle that maybe uses a lot of resources. So the example given, like if you're on Amazon and instead of doing the recommended buys, which maybe takes up a lot of CPU cycles or database cycles, then you could turn that feature off and allow the website to continue to run and people to buy stuff. And that nice feature that's normally there would sort of degrade nicely as those, as it can't quite cope with the load. So yeah, you can certainly use it for those sort of things. There'll probably be longer-lived toggles. So you probably want to limit those where you can. But yeah, it's something you can definitely do.
That's interesting. I was thinking about this question. Couldn't really think of a good answer. I think that's a good answer. I was actually thinking could be something around region as well, because I think Luke mentioned that there's some clean regions that we can use, and depending on the usage, could direct more traffic there. The next question, I actually want to answer this. What's some of the weirdest uses of feature toggles you've seen?
Oh, define weirdest first.
So the one I've seen is kind of, I would sort of define this as misuse of feature toggle, but it was trying to use the feature toggle tooling to return dynamic values. So like the link, say for privacy link, it has to return different URLs for regions. And that value was coming from the feature toggle API. So
were they using it as config or a database or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then, the argument for using this was so that the marketing team can update this if it changes, and it doesn't require code change. And because our the feature toggle interface that we're using, the marketing team had access to it. Yeah, I can see some horrified faces. What about others?
The weirdest. I mean, I don't think I can beat that. That's primo.
It's really creative, though. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but
full points for creatively solving a problem. I can think of doing things like people writing their own feature toggle service, and but nothing like that weird.
Yeah.
Should we move on?
Yep.
Yeah. So we've got, how do you manage feature toggles for features that require updating things like database schemas? How do you roll them back? It's a good question.
I can take this one if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
So if you're migrating database schemas, if you're adding a new field, it's not a problem. Because you add the new field, as long as it's not compulsory, you're fine. It's on, it adds it to the new field. If it's off, it doesn't. Where it gets tricky is either when you're trying to make that field compulsory, which at first maybe you can't and you do a data migration later, like an extra one after the feature toggle's gone, or if you're trying to delete a field in the database. And what I would do there is I would change the code so it no longer writes to the field you want to delete, release that, make sure it's all okay. Then once that was done and you had no references to the column or field you wanted to delete, and you were confident with that, go back and delete that field from the database, and then finally you can go through and delete the feature toggle from the code. So that way, yeah, that's the way I would do it.
Yeah, nice. I think I think this is like the refactoring database principles. It's those kind of engineering practices when you're doing database migrations kind of apply regardless of whether you're using feature toggles or not. And yeah, as Luke was describing, there's ways to safely migrate your schema in a way that because even if the feature toggle wasn't in place, you could still have things go wrong if you're migrating your database in a way that's not reversible. And so either way, you want to try find an approach that'll give you that ability to safely roll back and not break your code.
Yeah, I think feature toggles give you an extra level of safety. What it does is it allows you to put that new code into production and use it, knowing that if it goes wrong, you can flick it off really quickly and everything goes back to normal. So it would be in addition to the normal processes of database migration.
I would say just be careful with not just completely relying on feature toggle for safety net, because I think not only the database migration, but I've seen places where a certain feature or the change would sort of, change the format of the data being saved, for example, and that would cause like a permanent change. So even if you, toggle it back, the records are already updated, for example. So that caused some issues. So I think there are definitely limitations to feature toggles. It's not a silver bullet that can just, create safety net for every change that you do. So in this instance, we did have to do a rollback, which was not a good experience for everybody. So it did cause a little bit of, data loss when we had to roll back the change. But I think it's something to remember that feature toggles are not, it's not going to give you 100% safety for
That's a really
protecting
good point.
the change.
Yeah, it's like, we've got feature toggles, nothing can go wrong. No, it can.
Absolutely.
And they're definitely gotchas.
On that bombshell, as they say.
Oh, I thought we still had time left.
Yeah.
4:20?
I've got nearly 6 minutes on my timer here.
Okay, well, I've just embarrassed myself then.
That's okay, Nigel.
Okay, not finishing at 4:20? Keep going.
I think there's a really good question here that I'd like to get to, and that is, can I use feature toggles in mobile app? Yes, you can. You need to think about some more things. Things like you'll need to pass through, well, if you're using a service, then, and I would recommend using a service like or an internet, a service like LaunchDarkly or something like that, you'll need to pass through things like your operating system, Android or iOS, and also the version of the app so that you can control it. Especially if you're using for release toggles, you'll need to know that the version that it's safe to turn it on in, because if you're doing them as release toggles, you might have versions of the code where it's not safe to turn the toggle on. And with the long tail of mobile app versions that sticks around for a long time, because the users have control over when they're updated. So there's more to think about. There's lots of pitfalls with feature toggles, and you've got even more with mobile. If you're doing them as a config file that's sort of deployed, you don't have that fine-grained control of like, okay, we want to turn this on, oh, something's gone wrong, we want to turn it off. They are still useful, but they're not, I don't think they're as useful if they're not connected to the internet. You also need to think about, speaking about internet connection, you also need to think about with a mobile phone, you're a sometimes connected internet connection. It's not like on a website, on a desktop, where if they've loaded your website, you're guaranteed they've got internet connection, because otherwise they haven't loaded your website. With an app, they could have internet, and then they walk into an elevator, and then they're in a Faraday cage, and they have no internet all of a sudden. So there's a lot more to think about.
Okay. I'm delighted to discover that in the world of technology, there are two kinds of problems. One kind of problem where the code goes wrong, and the other one is an instrumentation problem. Thank goodness for that. I'm not a complete idiot, but your instrumentation's wrong. So thank you for the panel discussion to finish off our day. Super stimulating, and I think a lot of things that people will take away. Round of applause for the team.